The first thing to hit him wasn't the champagne. It was the laughter. "You missed a spot, Marcus." The crystal flute tipped, and an arc of pale gold sprayed across his chest. Cold fizz soaked into the green polo with the estate logo on it, ran down his forearms, and dripped off his gloves into the freshly mulched flower bed at his feet. The Caldwell Estate's back lawn glowed under strings of lights and the soft shimmer of chandeliers hanging inside white event tents. A string quartet played something elegant. Women in gowns and men in tuxedos clustered with cocktails in hand. A banner stretched across the terrace rail. Caldwell Foundation Gala, changing lives. One family at a time, right now. They were changing exactly one man's night. "God, Devin," a guest snorted. "He's not a fern. You don't have to water him." Laughter rippled across the terrace. Marcus stood completely still beside a bed of white roses he'd planted himself. Champagne slid cold down his neck, into the collar of his shirt. His cap lay upside down in the dirt where it had fallen. He kept his face neutral. "Sorry, man," Devin Caldwell drawled. Late 20s, haircut that cost more than Marcus's work boots, white sleeves rolled up just enough to look effortless. "You backed up while I was talking. Occupational hazard." "You tossed it at him," a woman in a backless dress muttered. "Relax," Devin said, lifting his voice so the nearby guests could hear. "He's the gardener. Dirt washes off." More laughter. Not everyone joined in, but no one stopped it. The French doors opened and the air shifted. Victoria Caldwell stepped onto the terrace. Navy gown, diamonds at her ears, silver hair pinned in a chignon. She had the kind of presence that made waiters straighten and guests stop mid-sentence. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes scanning the crowd. "Nothing, Mother," Devin said smoothly. "Minor spillage on the help." Her gaze flicked over Marcus. Wet shirt, cap in the soil, tray shards on the stone, and away again. "Make sure he doesn't drip on the terrace," she murmured. "And in the future, have staff use the side paths during speeches. They're too visible out here." The words hit harder than the champagne. Marcus bent, picked up his cap, and stepped off the main path. His pruning shears hung at his belt, catching the light. The rose bushes he'd coaxed into perfect bloom framed him like a picture. No one saw anything but a black man who'd ruined the view. "Leave it, man," Devin added. "The guests need entertainment before my father bores them to death." A few heads turned. The quartet swelled. Conversations resumed. Marcus wiped champagne from his eyes and retreated toward the hedge line, where the light didn't reach as brightly. If you were Marcus, standing there soaked and laughed at in a yard you'd spent months perfecting, would you clap back and risk your job? Would you swallow it because the rent doesn't care about your pride? Or would you stand in the shadows and wait, knowing something about this ground that none of them bothered to learn? Why, so the Caldwell estate sat on top of a hill, as if it had been dropped there by a god with too much money. A long sycamore-lined driveway curled past iron gates and stone pillars to a circular fountain where valets in black jackets opened doors. The house itself was all gray stone and high windows, with wings and terraces added over decades. At the back, layered patios stepped down to a lawn, then gardens, then an old orchard at the far slope. Underneath all that, history. The first Caldwell had made his fortune a century earlier in railroads and shady deals. He'd built the original mansion after the war, a smaller, heavier structure that had partly burned years later. The family had rebuilt, bigger, brighter, flashier. Bits of the old house were folded into the new, Some of it, people said, was still down there. Cellars, tunnels, a hidden vault. The Caldwells treated the estate like a kingdom. At the top of the hierarchy, Victoria, the iron spine behind the philanthropy brand, and Richard, whose face smiled from brochures and hospital plaques. Below them, their children, Devon, golden boy and full-time embarrassment. Amelia, quiet, observant, less present, but more aware. Below that, guests with money, guests with power. Below that, the people who made everything happen while pretending not to exist. Housekeepers, chefs, drivers, gardeners. The rule for them was simple. Make everything perfect, and make yourselves invisible. Victoria lived for perfection. "We have a reputation," she would say as she marched through the halls. "When people come here, they see the Caldwell legacy." She corrected place settings without looking at the servers. She adjusted flower heights, moved chairs half an inch, vetoed desserts because the garnish felt too provincial. To the staff, she seldom used names. "You," she'd say, gesturing at the nearest housekeeper. The guest in the east wing sent back the towels, replaced them. "Gardener," she'd call without looking up from her tablet. "The line of hedges by the fountain is uneven. Fix it before the Dedhams arrive." If she didn't see you, you were doing your job. Richard drifted through like a satellite. Black Mercedes to office, office to study, study to terrace drinks. He laughed loud during business calls, shook hands with donors, gave rehearsed speeches about giving back. Caldwells take care of their community, he liked to say. He meant other people who went to the same galas, not the man trimming his hedges. Marcus had been here almost 2 years. Every morning, he parked his old pickup at the service road and watched the sky lighten over the trees. By the time espresso machines whirred in the kitchen upstairs, he'd be on the lawn, dew on his boots, pruning roses or hauling mulch. Those early hours were his favorite. No radios, no estate manager shouting about timelines. Just him, the soil, and the slow, patient work of shaping something living. He knew every inch of these grounds, where the earth held moisture, where roots tangled too close to old pipes, which corner flooded after a storm, and lately he'd noticed something else. Along the lower terrace edge, where the stone met the slope down to the orchard, a thin crack had appeared. At first, it was just a shadow line. He crouched, ran his fingers along it. The stone sounded wrong when he tapped it. Hollow. The soil at the edge sloped down like something underneath was sinking. He'd flagged it to Mr. Green, the estate manager. "There's a void under here," Marcus had said. "Feels like something's giving way." Green had given the crack a bored look. "This place is older than my grandmother," he'd said. "There are a dozen voids out here. As long as the terrace doesn't slide down to the orchard before Saturday, we're fine." Saturday was the gala. Marcus had watched them build the stage for the speeches. The event crew rolled in heavy platforms, speakers, lighting rigs. All of it rolled right over the crack to the front center of the terrace. "You might want to shift that left," Marcus told one of them. "The stone's weak here." The tech didn't even look down. "I put stuff where the diagram says, man." Marcus adjusted a few cables when no one watched, trying to spread the load, but the bulk of the weight sat exactly where his gut said it shouldn't. He wrote a note in the back of his pocket notebook. "Void under lower terrace. Weight on wrong line." Then he went back to trimming the hedge. He'd learned the hard way that a gardener who talked too much about things above his pay grade didn't stay employed long. Before this place, there'd been another yard. Small, patchy lawn, cracked porch, a roof perpetually one windstorm away from disaster. That was home. His mother had filled their tiny yard with life. Tomatoes in buckets, flowers in chipped mugs, a climbing vine up a bent fence. His father had filled the kitchen table with blueprints. He'd worked construction until a fall from scaffolding changed everything. After that, there were painkillers and doctors and fewer jobs and quiet arguments late at night. But his hands still knew buildings. He'd spread plans out and explain them, turning technical lines into simple metaphors. "See this?" he'd say, pointing at a beam. "You stack too much weight on a weak piece, it's going to crack. Don't matter how pretty the paint is on top. Houses don't care about your feelings. They care about physics." Marcus had watched, listened, learned. He found himself sketching houses in school, imagining better ways to distribute loads, make things safer, fairer. He'd planned to study structural engineering. Then his father's body gave out before the bills did. Then his mother got sick too. College shrank to a what if. Marcus took any work he could find. Warehouses, landscaping, hauling junk in neighborhoods where the trash he carried away looked nicer than the furniture in his own house. His mother never stopped saying, "Keep learning. They can take your time, not your mind." He believed her. He watched online lectures about foundations and retaining walls after long shifts. He fell asleep over free PDFs of old engineering textbooks. He looked at every building like it was a puzzle. By the time he got the job at the Caldwell estate, his dream had been shoved into the corners of his life. But it was still there, folded small and stubborn. He walked these grounds not just as a man with pruning shears, but as a man reading a structure. Where does the water go? Where does the weight sit? Where will this place break if no one listens? The answer came the night of the gala. Victoria stood at the podium, framed by floral arrangements Marcus had placed, above that thin crack he couldn't stop thinking about. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying across the glowing patio, "is about legacy, about building a future where every family—" The stone made a sound, a low grinding groan Marcus felt more than heard. The hair on his arms rose. He looked down the terrace line. The crack was wider. Nobody else seemed to notice. Waiters weaved with trays. Guests checked their phones. Richard stood to the side, in position for his turn at the mic. Victoria continued, "Where every family has the chance to—" The terrace jolted. A sharp crack split the night. Glasses rattled. The podium shuddered. A woman in the front row grabbed her chair. What was that? Is it an earthquake? Richard stepped toward the mic. "Everyone stay calm." The outer edge of the terrace dropped half an inch in a sickening, visible lurch. The rail dipped. One chair leg slid toward the edge. Screams. People surged toward the French doors, instinct drowning out instruction. "Get inside! Move!" Marcus's brain went bright and fast. If they all rushed that way, they'd be funneling their weight across the weakest point. The stone groaned again, louder, like a tired animal warning before it collapsed. He moved toward the stage. "Marcus!" someone shouted. "Leave it!" He grabbed a fallen mic. Feedback squealed through the speakers, shocking the crowd into stillness. "Everybody, stop!" he shouted. "Don't move." Hundreds of eyes snapped to him. The gardener, the man they'd laughed at an hour ago. "Who the hell?" Devin started. "There's a void under this section," Marcus said, forcing his voice steady. "If you all run the same way, that edge will take you with it." "How do you know?" someone demanded. "Because I've been walking this stone every day," Marcus said. Because I heard it cracking this week. Because my father built houses for 30 years, and I paid attention. The terrace trembled again. Dust trickled from the edge. "Listen to him," Green barked, voice raw with an authority the guests hadn't heard before. "Move in rows, left side first, toward the stairs. Spread out. Don't crowd the middle." "This is ridiculous," a man in a tuxedo muttered. "He's just—" The floor shifted under his feet. He shut up. People near the edge started toward the safer stairs in small groups. Those toward the middle waited, white-knuckled, until it was their turn. Waiters guided them around spilled drinks. Someone grabbed 2 kids off the railing and held them tight. It was messy and slow and imperfect, but it was enough. When the last cluster cleared the suspect section, the terrace gave one final, awful groan. A chunk of stone tore free along the crack line. The outer strip of the patio snapped, railing and all, and crashed down the slope in a shower of rock and dust. The sound swallowed the string quartet, the music, the polite clinking that had filled this space 10 minutes ago. A gray cloud billowed. No one went with it. For a long moment, the entire party stared at the jagged gap where floor had been. Then, slowly, dozens of faces turned toward Marcus. He lowered the mic. His hands were shaking. No one was laughing now. By morning, the cracked patio was caution-taped, the air filled with the hum of official response. Fire trucks, city inspectors, structural engineers in vests and hard hats. They climbed down to the exposed cut in the terrace, shined lights into the cavity. "There's something down here," one of the engineers called. "Looks like part of the old foundation. And is that a door?" From above, Richard swore softly. "Of course there is." Marcus watched from a few feet back, arms folded, adrenaline hangover leaving his muscles tired and wired. Every time his gaze slipped toward the dark opening, his mind tugged at it. Under the terrace, under the party, under generations of Caldwell. What had they built on top of? "Marcus." Green's voice crackled in his radio. "The family wants to speak to you. Study." Here it comes, he thought. He wiped dust off his hands and went inside. Set, the study smelled like old leather and power. Dark wood walls, shelves of books that looked opened once for the photograph and never again. Diplomas, articles about Caldwell Capital framed and hung like trophies. Victoria and Richard stood behind the desk. Devin sprawled in a chair to the side, tie loosened. Amelia leaned against a shelf, arms folded. "You took quite a bit of initiative last night," Richard said. His tone was careful. That worried Marcus more than shouting would have. "I didn't see anyone else holding the mic," Marcus said quietly. The stone was already moving. "You terrified our guests," Devin snapped. "You were barking orders like you owned the place." "I stopped them from walking off the edge," Marcus replied. "You were out of line," Devin shot back. "Enough," Victoria said. Silence settled. Her gaze was cool, assessing. "The fire chief says your instructions likely prevented injuries," she said. "The engineers say you were the first to correctly identify where the terrace was failing." She said it like a fact, not flattery. Marcus stayed quiet. "Which raises a question," she continued. "How did you know?" Marcus nodded to the window, toward the cracked edge of stone barely visible from here. "I noticed the line in the terrace a week ago," he said. "Heard the echo under it. Soil sinking. My father worked in construction most of his life. I've kept learning." "You didn't tell us," Devin said. "I told Mr. Green there was a void," Marcus said. He thought we'd be fine as long as it held through the gala. Green wasn't here to confirm or deny. Marcus didn't throw him under the bus. The words were enough. Victoria tapped her fingernails on a thin folder on the desk. The inspector is very interested in the structural history of this estate, she said. There are partial blueprints from when the house was rebuilt. They imply old cellars beneath the terrace. There are also rumors of a hidden vault. Rumors, Devon repeated. Granddad told those stories after his third scotch. I've seen it, Victoria said quietly. Once, when I was a girl. My father took me down and told me this was where we kept things that mattered. She opened the folder, showing copies of old plans, faded diagrams, incomplete. We can't find the access again, she said. We can't locate the original structural notes, and the inspector will not accept lost in time as an answer. If they think we built onto unstable foundations, knowingly. Fines, Richard said tightly. Liability, a PR mess. What does this have to do with me? Marcus asked. You know the land, she said simply. Clearly better than we do. The engineers suggested you might be useful in finding the remaining voids and any access to that vault, if it exists. She didn't quite make eye contact on the word useful. So you want me to go down there, he said, under the terrace that almost failed, and find your grandfather's secrets before an inspector does. Is that a problem? Devon asked. Marcus thought of last night, of Devon laughing as champagne ran down his face, of the terrace groaning beneath people who had no idea how close they'd come, of his mother saying, they can't take what's in your head. No, Marcus said, but if I find anything that affects safety, I'm not hiding it. Victoria's jaw flexed. We are not asking you to lie, she said. We're asking you to help us avoid unnecessary hysteria. He nodded once. Okay, I'll need the copies of the plans you have, and access to the void. Richard hesitated. Amelia didn't. She slid the folder off the desk and handed it to Marcus. He flipped through the pages. Even incomplete, he could see the bones of the older house, where load-bearing walls had been, where cellars sat. A darker, unlabeled box just off the main basement footprint. If he mentally overlaid these lines on the current grounds, that box sat right under the section that had collapsed. Looks like your grandfather built your terrace on the roof of whatever he tried to hide, Marcus murmured. Richard's mouth tightened. Just find it, he said. Marcus closed the folder. I will, he said. Top of the air under the terrace was colder. They'd shored up the entrance, braced beams so nothing else would fall while they worked. The engineers moved ahead with flashlights, checking for loose stone and rotten supports. Marcus followed, ducking under low arches, boots crunching dirt and debris. Past a half-collapsed wall, the shape emerged from the dark. A door, thick wood bound by iron, swollen by time, half buried in soil and roots. Bingo, one of the engineers breathed. Can you open it? Richard called from above. We'll try, came the reply. They worked the hinges carefully. Metal screamed in protest. Dust fell. Marcus levers his shoulder against it with them. The door groaned, then shifted enough to creep inward. Cold, stale air breathed out. Marcus squeezed inside. Flashlight beams swept old stone walls lined with shelves, boxes, a heavy desk, a squat metal cabinet bolted into the far wall, a vault within the vault. Watch your step, the engineer said behind him. But structurally, this room is sound. Marcus moved to the desk. Papers lay scattered and curled by damp. He brushed dust aside. Blueprints, not faded photocopies. The originals, Lines crisp, notes in ink, complete foundation drawings with annotations about hidden supports, drainage channels, cellar layouts. His heart thudded, plain as daylight. The old foundations under the orchard, the tunnels connecting to the east wing, the load-bearing pillars under the modern house. If someone had read these properly, last night's crack would never have been a surprise. As he carefully lifted the stack, a smaller folded document slipped free. He unfolded it. Words in a neat, old-fashioned script. In the event of my passing, this will shall supersede all prior testamentary documents. He kept reading. His breath left him. The old Caldwell patriarch had redrafted his will. Less for his heirs, more for the people who worked this land. Scholarship funds, a staff trust, portions of profits earmarked for families whose names were scribbled in the margins. Green, Watterson, Lew, Mbai. Names Marcus recognized from staff rosters and stories. This was a blueprint too. Not for concrete, for conscience. It had been hidden here and never filed. The current Caldwells were living on wealth that had arguably been meant to flow a different way. Marcus? Amelia's voice echoed faintly from the entrance. Anything? He looked up at the dark opening and the sliver of their world beyond. I found your vault, he said, and something else. But they didn't shove him out the door when he brought the will upstairs. They gathered, Victoria, pale, Richard, tense, Devon, defensive, Amelia, unreadable, Green, the head housekeeper. The chef, arms flour-dusted, summoned mid-shift. A lawyer pulled in as soon as they realized this was more than old junk. The lawyer read the will twice. It appears valid, he said quietly. Signed, witnessed, no sign it was replaced. If it was intentionally hidden and never probated. He let the sentence trail off. What does it say? Green asked. Less for the heirs, Amelia summarized, scanning. More for everyone else. For staff, for their kids, for this county. Her mouth tightened. None of which ever happened. Devon bristled. So what? We're supposed to liquidate everything? Give it all back because some dead relative had a crisis of conscience? That dead relative built the fortune you're sitting on, the chef said quietly. Our families helped maintain it. We have treated our staff well, Victoria said, the automatic line coming a little slower this time. We pay above average. You let your son humiliate him in front of 100 people, Amelia interrupted, eyes on Devon. And you looked away. Victoria's jaw flinched. Everyone's eyes slid to Marcus. He hadn't taken a seat. Standing near the bookshelf felt safer. You asked me to find what was under your house, he said. Structurally, I did. He nodded toward the rolled-up plans on the desk. Your terrace failed because someone ignored what these drawings show. You kept putting weight on a weak edge and assumed nothing would happen because it hadn't yet. His gaze shifted to the will. This, he said, is the same thing. Your grandfather designed a different load for this family to carry. Responsibility spread out, not stacked up. That got ignored too. You're a gardener, Devon snapped, not a moral philosopher. Marcus let the insult sit. Then, I'm the gardener who kept your guests from going over the side, he said softly. At some point, you either listen to the person who can see the crack, or you don't. But you can't say you didn't know it was there. The lawyer cleared his throat. Legally, he said, this will may not be fully enforceable now. Too much time has passed. Other documents were filed. But ethically, if this ever became public... You're saying we could look greedy, Richard muttered. You could look like you benefited from something your own patriarch wanted to correct, the lawyer said. Silence thickened. Amelia looked straight at Marcus. What would you do? She asked. If you were us? He almost laughed. Instead, he answered honestly. I'd fix the house, he said. Properly, not just the terrace. Use the plans. Reinforce what needs reinforcing. Prevent the next failure rather than reacting to it. He tapped the will gently. And I'd treat this as a promise, he added. Even if the law doesn't force you, set up the scholarships, the trust. Start with the families whose grandparents served here. It won't erase what didn't happen, but it'll change what happens next. Devin rolled his eyes. And let you decide how our money is spent? Marcus looked him in the eye. You asked what I'd do, he said. You didn't ask for something that wouldn't cost you anything. Richard rubbed his forehead. Victoria stared at the will. Green broke the tension softly. My grandfather used to talk about how Mr. Caldwell said he'd take care of us someday, he said. We thought he was just being kind or drunk. Maybe he meant it. The head housekeeper nodded, eyes glistening. My mother used to say the same. For the first time, Devin's certainty flickered. Whatever you decide, the lawyer said, you now know this document exists. That knowledge carries weight. That word again. Weight. The thing they'd shifted last night. The thing they'd nearly let kill people. The thing Marcus had spent his life understanding from the bottom up. Change didn't come in a montage. It came in meetings, in rewrites, in uncomfortable conversations and calls and board votes Marcus wasn't part of, but felt the effects of. Within weeks, there was a new fund with an old name. The Caldwell Workers' Legacy Fund. A chunk of money peeled off from accounts that had never been meant to be so swollen and redirected. Finally, toward the people whose backs had held that estate up. Scholarships, health stipends, education support for staff families. Not enough to fix history, enough to bend the future. For Marcus, it came in a manila envelope. He was setting stones near the edge of the cordoned-off terrace when Amelia approached. We're reopening part of the orchard slope, she said. Rebuilding the supporting walls, with permits this time. Good, he said. She held out the envelope. And this is for you. He wiped his hands and opened it. A formal offer letter, its new title, Structural and Grounds Liaison, Caldwell Estate, half his week in the gardens. Half working alongside engineers and inspectors. Tuition support for a part-time engineering degree if he wanted it. Salary bump that made his chest tighten. We need someone who can read both this place and these, she said, tapping the corner of the blueprint he always seemed to have near him now. You've been doing the job unofficially. We'd like to pay you for it. As what? Devin had sneered when the idea had first been floated. The gardener engineer? As the only person who noticed the terrace was failing before it did, one of the engineers had replied. If you're smart, you'll listen to him. Marcus looked at Amelia. And the other thing? He asked. The will. The fund is real, she said. It's not as much as it should have been, but it's a start. Staff kids are already applying for next year's scholarships. She hesitated. We put you on the advisory board. Green, too. Some of the older staff. It seemed right. He blinked. You want me in those meetings? You're already in them, she said. You just weren't in the room. He looked back at the letter. He thought of his father's battered hands on paper blueprints, his mother's voice telling him that what he learned couldn't be taken away. He thought of champagne on his shirt and laughter on the terrace. He thought of stone collapsing in a roar, and the moment afterward when all those faces, all that wealth, turned to him because they had no idea what to do. He signed, not as the gardener who'd gotten lucky, as the man who'd studied the cracks, listened to the stone, and dragged a vault into the light. Maybe your life doesn't involve mansions and secret wills. Maybe you've never had a microphone in your hand while the ground literally shifted under people who never bothered to learn your name. But you might know this feeling. You see a problem before anyone else. You feel the structure straining. You trace a crack with your finger, and someone with more money and less sense shrugs and says, "It'll hold. It always has." You're the one on the bottom. You're the gardener, the cleaner, the driver, the assistant, the black employee who gets called by your job title instead of your name. The one lucky to be here. They don't ask what you know. They don't imagine you might be reading blueprints at night, taking online courses, teaching yourself the language of whatever system sits on your shoulders. Until something shifts, and the surface they've trusted starts to fail. The thing about foundations is this: they don't care about your story. They respond to reality. If the weight is wrong, the cracks will come. If the wrong people hoard the load, someone goes over the edge. The rich family ignored the black gardener until the terrace groaned, until the void opened, until the man they'd soaked in champagne grabbed a mic and told their guests where to stand so they didn't die. They ignored the voices and lives under their wealth, until they found a vault full of proof that their fortune had been meant to be shared differently all along. Marcus didn't get that moment because life suddenly decided to be fair. He got it because he was ready. Because he paid attention in the dark. Because he held on to what he knew when the world told him his job was just to keep the roses blooming and his mouth shut. When the moment came, he didn't ask permission. He stepped forward. He spoke with the authority of someone who actually understood the ground, not the borrowed authority of a name on a deed. He forced the people at the top to look at what they'd built on and what they'd built over. And he made a simple, devastating point. You don't get to pretend you didn't know anymore. If you've been the one in the background, remember this: your invisibility to them is not proof of your smallness. It's proof of their narrow vision. The skills you build in the margins matter. The cracks you see before anyone else, those matter too. One day the structure will groan, the terrace will shift, the vault will open, the old stories will crumble. When that happens, the room will turn in panic. And the person they once humiliated might be the only one with a map in their hand, a plan in their head, and the courage to tell the truth out loud. They may not like it, but they will listen. Because gravity doesn't care who is rich and who is poor. And when the choice is between falling and trusting the black gardener they ignored yesterday, they will choose you. So keep learning, keep watching, keep tracing the cracks no one else has time for. The vaults under this world are full of buried blueprints for something better. All it takes is one person brave enough to climb down, turn on a light, and bring them back up where everyone can see.